Daniel and Victoria Hargrove were the couple everyone envied. 20 years of marriage, 2 beautiful children, and a life that looked perfect from the outside. But when Daniel uncovered a forgotten letter in his late father's attic, everything he thought he knew about his wife unraveled. What he found didn't just point to a hidden past, it hinted at a buried identity, a blackmail threat, and a missing girl no one had seen in over 2 decades. By the time the truth came out, Daniel wasn't just questioning his marriage. He was questioning whether the woman he loved had ever really existed. For 20 years, Daniel and Victoria Hargrove lived what most people would call the perfect life. They were the kind of couple that made everything look easy. Married in 2003 after a whirlwind romance, they settled into a cozy 3-bedroom home in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Their house was the one with seasonal decorations always on time, a perfectly trimmed lawn, and the smell of fresh coffee wafting out every Saturday morning. They had 2 children, Ella and James, and a golden retriever named Maple who was just as much a part of the family as anyone else. Daniel worked for a software company, bringing in a solid income, while Victoria ran a thriving interior design business from home. She had an eye for aesthetics and a reputation for transforming bland rooms into magazine-worthy spaces. Friends and neighbors adored them. At block parties, Victoria would show up with homemade desserts and a perfectly arranged cheese platter, while Daniel charmed everyone with his dry humor and stories about tech fails and office politics. Their kids were polite, well-dressed, and did well in school. Everything about the Hargroves screamed stability, success, and love. On social media, their photos painted a picture of warmth, family hikes in the fall, matching pajamas on Christmas morning, beach trips where not a single hair seemed out of place. If there were problems, no one ever saw them. Even their arguments, when they happened, were quiet and respectful. There were no slammed doors, no shouting matches. Daniel had always been a calm presence, grounded, rational, almost methodical in the way he handled things. Victoria, on the other hand, was intuitive and thoughtful, someone who avoided conflict by staying 2 steps ahead of it. They balanced each other out in a way that made others envious. They knew each other's routines, favorite foods, pet peeves. For all intents and purposes, their life together was seamless. But Victoria had a secret she'd kept hidden for over 2 decades, so well buried that even she sometimes believed it had disappeared. It wasn't the kind of secret you casually reveal over wine or during a late-night heart-to-heart. It was the kind that could shatter everything: trust, marriage, even personal identity. And so she kept it locked away, compartmentalized in a part of her mind she never visited. She convinced herself it didn't matter anymore, that who she had been before didn't define her now. Victoria Hargrove was a devoted wife, a loving mother, a talented designer. She had built a new life, one rooted in love and care and purpose, and for 20 years it worked. She kept the past where it belonged, in the past. Daniel never asked too many questions, and she never gave him a reason to. Their lives rolled forward like a well-oiled machine. But secrets, no matter how deeply hidden, have a way of finding the surface. Sometimes it just takes the right trigger. Something small, unexpected, and seemingly harmless. For Victoria, that trigger was a letter in a dusty attic, and once it was opened, nothing could ever be the same. It started on a gray November afternoon, the kind where time feels slower and memories seem closer. Daniel had taken a few days off work after the sudden passing of his father, Richard Hargrove. The funeral had been quiet and respectful, just as his father would have wanted. Afterward, Daniel drove to his childhood home to begin the solemn task of clearing out the belongings left behind. The house, untouched in years, was filled with fading photos, dusty books, and the silence of a life now ended. It was in the attic, cluttered and cold, that Daniel stumbled upon the envelope that would change everything. It was tucked inside a box labeled Daniel School Years, sandwiched between report cards and old drawings. The envelope was yellowed with age and sealed with thick cracking glue. Written on the front in his father's steady handwriting were the words, "For Daniel, only if it happens." There was no explanation as to what it was. Intrigued and with a creeping sense of unease, Daniel opened it. The letter inside was short, but its contents were unsettling. His father had written it more than a decade earlier, apparently after witnessing something he couldn't forget. The note described a strange moment years ago, during a summer barbecue at Daniel and Victoria's home. Richard recalled overhearing Victoria talking in hushed tones with a stranger near the side gate. He didn't catch much, but he remembered a few fragments. "I'm not going back. This life is mine now." And something about starting over. At the time, he dismissed it as an emotional conversation, maybe a family dispute. But as years went on, and he watched Victoria carefully navigate life with an almost obsessive need for control, doubts began to grow. He never told anyone, not even Daniel. But now, sensing the end of his life, he felt the need to share what he'd heard. Daniel sat frozen with the letter in his hands. His father wasn't prone to paranoia or drama. He was a quiet, rational man who believed in facts over feelings. If he had written something like this, it was because it had truly bothered him. Still, Daniel didn't want to jump to conclusions. People had pasts, conversations were taken out of context all the time. But he couldn't deny that something about the letter unsettled him deeply. It planted a seed, and that seed grew into 1,000 questions. He tried to shake it off. That night he returned home, tucked the letter into his sock drawer, and said nothing to Victoria. She welcomed him with a warm hug and asked how things had gone. Her smile was soft and genuine. Nothing about her seemed off. And yet, as they sat down to dinner with the kids, Daniel couldn't stop replaying the phrases in his head. Starting over. Not going back. For the first time in 20 years, he realized how little he knew about the years before Victoria became Victoria Hargrove. And for the first time, he wasn't sure he wanted to find out. The days that followed were filled with unease. Daniel couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep properly, and found himself drifting off mid-conversation. Every time he looked at Victoria, he felt a strange tug in his chest, a combination of love, suspicion, and fear. He didn't want to believe there was something she had been hiding all these years, but the letter had opened a door in his mind that refused to close. He began noticing little things he had ignored before. Victoria always changed behind a locked bathroom door. She rarely talked about her childhood, and when she did, the stories were vague, often lacking detail. She had no contact with extended family, no high school friends, no old photos from before 2001. One evening, while Victoria was out running errands, Daniel opened her filing cabinet in the home office. He told himself he was just looking for answers, nothing more. The cabinet was organized with meticulous care. Bank statements, client invoices, tax forms, everything filed in neat folders. He noticed a folder labeled Personal Docs and opened it. Inside were copies of her driver's license, passport, and a birth certificate from Ohio. But the birth certificate had a date of issue in 2001, despite her birth year being listed as 1975. That didn't make sense. The more he looked, the more inconsistencies he found. There were no documents dated earlier than 2001. No credit history, no employment records, no medical files from before that year. It was as if Victoria Hargrove had materialized out of thin air in her mid-20s. That night, Daniel sat in the dark living room for hours, piecing everything together. The timeline didn't add up, and the gaps were too large to be ignored. He decided to hire a private investigator. It felt extreme, almost like a betrayal. But he couldn't stop himself. He told the investigator only what was necessary. He wanted to know more about his wife's life before 2001. The man took the job without hesitation and promised to dig quietly. 3 weeks later, Daniel received a file. It wasn't thick, but it was devastating. The investigator had traced Victoria's social security number and compared it to similar identity applications. What came back was a name Daniel had never heard before: Victor Monroe. A student enrolled at a small college in Ohio in the late 1990s. The investigator had found one photo, a black and white ID scan of a person who looked uncannily like a younger, more androgynous version of Victoria. Same eyes, same mouth, same distinctive scar near the right eyebrow. Victor Monroe had dropped out of school in 1999 and vanished. No records after that. The trail went cold until 2001 when a new identity, Victoria Moore, appeared, later becoming Victoria Hargrove. Everything else was clean. No criminal records, no legal name change on file, nothing to explain the transformation. Daniel sat in silence, staring at the photo. 20 years of memories began to shift in his mind, recolored by the possibility that the woman he had built a life with had once been someone else entirely. The truth was out now, but it only led to more questions. Daniel didn't sleep the night he received the file. The image of the scanned photo, Victor Monroe's face staring back at him, was burned into his mind. He wanted to believe there was a simple explanation, something that would make this all go away. But the deeper he fell into the mystery, the more tangled it became. Instead of confronting Victoria, he decided to observe, to wait, and to see if anything in her behavior would confirm what he now suspected. What he found was not what he expected. Victoria wasn't acting strange. If anything, she was more herself than ever. Calm, affectionate, even cheerful. She kissed him goodnight, reminded the kids about their homework, and went about her life with ease. But to Daniel, it all felt like a performance now. He couldn't unsee the cracks. Every gesture, every sentence was suddenly under a microscope. He noticed how she deflected questions about her past, how she avoided the topic of her family altogether. She was a master at steering conversations, always managing to keep the spotlight off herself. 2 weeks after receiving the file, something new arrived at the house. A black envelope addressed to Victoria. No return address. Daniel intercepted it on a rainy Tuesday afternoon while collecting the mail. The envelope was thick, the paper smooth and heavy. He stood in the kitchen staring at it, unsure of what to do. Finally, he opened it. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. The same face from the investigator's report, Victor Monroe, but this time not a scanned ID. It was a candid shot. Young Victor stood in front of a battered brick building holding a backpack. The photo was dated July 1998. On the back, scrawled in blocky handwriting, were 6 words: "You owe me. Tell him, or I will." Daniel's hands shook as he read it over and over. This wasn't just a hidden past anymore. This was a threat. Someone out there knew the truth about Victoria, someone who clearly had a connection to her former life. Blackmail. The realization hit like ice. It explained so much. The secrecy, the anxiety he sometimes caught in her eyes when she thought no one was looking, the strange phone calls she dismissed as spam. Now it wasn't just about identity. It was about danger. Someone was trying to force her into revealing a truth she had worked so hard to keep buried. Daniel had thought he was the only one unwrapping this secret, but he was wrong. There was someone else, someone who wanted to use it as leverage, and they were getting closer. Daniel considered going to the police but stopped himself. What would he even say? That his wife might not be who she claimed to be? That she received an anonymous letter? It would only cause more chaos. He had to know what she was hiding, what had really happened back then, and who this person was. The truth was circling closer and closer, and with every passing day, Daniel realized this wasn't just a secret identity. This was a secret life. The confrontation came quietly, without shouting or accusations. Daniel simply placed the photograph on the kitchen counter one evening and waited. When Victoria saw it, the color drained from her face. She didn't ask where he got it. She didn't try to lie. Instead, she walked out of the room without a word and returned a few minutes later with a small brass key. She placed it in his hand and told him to follow her. She led him downstairs past the laundry room to a narrow door he had never noticed before. It was tucked behind a storage shelf, hidden so well that it blended into the wall. She unlocked it with the brass key and stepped aside. Daniel entered first. The room was small and cold. The walls were lined with boxes, some labeled, some not. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting sharp shadows. He pulled one box down and opened it. Inside were notebooks, photographs, letters, pieces of a life he never knew existed. One photo stopped him cold. It showed Victor Monroe and a girl, about 16, with long dark hair and a shy smile. Written on the back in faded ink, Victor and Lena, Spring '98. Daniel looked up at Victoria, who was standing motionless by the door. She finally spoke, her voice flat. Lena was her younger sister, she said. Their childhood had been violent, their stepfather cruel. When Lena began to act out, social workers got involved, but nothing ever changed. Then, one night in 1999, Lena vanished after a screaming match with their stepfather. No body was ever found. The case went cold, and suspicion fell on Victor, who had been the last one to see her. Rather than face a system that wouldn't believe him, he disappeared. She paused before continuing. After leaving town, Victor went underground. He stayed with a friend, worked under-the-table jobs, and eventually moved to another state. During those years, he began a slow process of transition. It wasn't impulsive, it wasn't sudden. It was the result of years of quiet pain, identity confusion, and finally, clarity. By 2001, Victor Monroe had legally and emotionally become Victoria Moore. Victoria had never been involved in Lena's disappearance, but she had never cleared her name either. She had wanted a clean slate, a life where she wasn't defined by trauma or grief. She met Daniel shortly after finishing her transition and fell in love. And for 20 years, that love became her shield, her reason to keep everything buried. The blackmailer, she explained, was someone from college who had recognized her and wanted money. She had paid once before years ago, but they had come back demanding more. This time they had found her address. She hadn't told Daniel because she feared losing everything. Daniel didn't speak for a long time. His heart was caught between anger and sorrow, between betrayal and compassion. He left the basement without saying a word. 2 weeks later, Victoria turned herself in, not for fraud, but for withholding evidence in a missing person case. The case was reopened. Victoria received a short sentence, most of it served under supervision. Lena was never found. The truth had come out, but the mystery had only deepened. And for Daniel, the question would always remain. Had she been running from her past or hiding something far worse?